All right. Well, I like to introduce this stellar cast of panelists, and that I'm so proud and happy to see here. I'm gonna start with Bella Desai, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Creatives Rebuild New York. And then we have Greer Smith, who is founder and CEO of TRANSART. We have Otto Butler, who is Associate Labor Commissioner for Research and Policy at the New York State DOL. And we have Angel Vasquez, who is Deputy Secretary for Union Relations to the New York State Governor, Kathy Hochul. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. Some of you had the chance to witness the entire event so far, which been great. We heard from artists and organizations about the impacts of the program on their lives, their practice. And so this panel, our discussion is gonna focus on the future and what can be done to support artists as workers and their organizations in terms of economic development and workforce development policies and programs from the public sector and the private sector as well. So this is gonna be sort of like a brainstorm discussion in which you're gonna bring your perspective to bear on what would be the public and private sector initiatives that can help, that can support this important workforce in our state and this important industry sector, the arts and culture sector. So I'd like to start with a question for Greer Smith. And you represent an organization, Greer, and you went through the program. It had an impact on you. Can you tell us about your current situation, experience since the program ended? And what are your thoughts and plans for moving forward?
The whole experience was wonderful, and in light of what emails just flew today, this is a very important question. I don't know about anybody else um, in the group, but NEA just sent out a statement that their Challenge America Fast Track grant was not going to happen. And that's something that's been in existence for a while, and it's one of the easier ones to get because it's a straight shot, $10,000. It's not the usual thing that you have to go through. They also changed the date. We had a gap one deadline to begin the application process on the 13th. That is not happening. It is moved back. They didn't say it was no longer happening. So we also know for artists what happened with the MAP fund, that's not happening anymore. So when you talk about coming out of Creatives Rebuild New York and having 4 artists in-house for 2 years, being able to plan effectively and do audience development and have a community that is looking forward to you being there with what they need so much. Yeah, the question is, what are we going to do? We sort of People are saying we've been here before. Yeah, kind of, but not like this. The environment has not been the vitriol, the negative energy, the hasn't been like this before. And we always knew that the NEA and PBS was always under attack, but it was always saved. This time, we don't know that. And for what's happening now, I'm not so sure. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
Yes,
this is the place that we are sitting, and this is where the conversation should begin.
yes, is the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
And I'm glad you raised that point. And so, well, with that context, I would like to ask Bella about your ideas, Bella, for moving forward within this new context in which we are, and knowing that this program, the AEP, has so many benefits for workers, for artists as workers, um, and given the range of initiatives and benefits that you provided through this program, what would you prioritize moving forward to raise support and funding for?
Thank you for the question, Maria. And I am totally with Greer. This time feels so tumultuous and turbulent and difficult and different. I think it's true than times that we faced before. And also, I think that given what's happening at the federal level, we really need to pivot. It's more important than ever to really look at the state for support and to look at philanthropy for support. I think that that's where there's going to need to be some pickup. And I think one of the things that I'd love to highlight is, we spent a lot of time in the last few months as Creators Rebuild New York is winding down after the Artist Employment Program ended. We spent a tremendous amount of time working with colleagues and advisors like HRNA to put together a policy playbook for New York State that has specific policy proposals that at the state level that we can push forward in resistance, in reaction, in opposition in some cases to what's happening federally. And so I think that that's a big priority for us and where we're really looking to try to move. Specifically in terms of impacts, I would prioritize for future programs and policy and funding initiatives. I think, one of the things that we've seen so beautifully that you've all spoken about, especially the artists, is the artist's ability to bring their skills and expertise to multiple sectors, right? And part of that is the part of this fight, right? Part of this fight against what's going on. And what's always been true is that artists have been the number one resistors, the number one pushers against systems of oppression, again, like the canaries in the coal mine, right? That are out there being like, this is a problem. And so I think that the artists in some ways are workers like other workers and need the same protections as other workers, and also have a special role to play because of their ability to do that incredible storytelling, to do that incredible translation of the data and the numbers that we know and we see into stories that really hit people's hearts. And so I think that there is an enormous opportunity for artists in this moment to push and to be supported in that pushing. We see too the impact of artists on organizational cultures, right? So it's about moving the missions forward, and it's also about elevating and shifting the way that organizations work and the way they connect with community. And that's what we saw in the data that Maria showed earlier today. Like, we really see how organizations have benefited and shifted based on having those artists employed. And then I think in terms of like a specific policy proposal, at the state level, we need support to create an artist employment program and artist employment programs, around the state, positions in government that allow artists to address environmental, health, and safety needs in their communities. I think that's something that we've seen be enormously successful. I mean, Greer, the folks from TRANSART, the work that they were able to do upstate, the kinds of education and inspiration and community development and economic development they brought to those areas, I think are exactly the kind of thing we need more of. And hopefully with folks like the Assemblyman in the, in the state legislature, we can be pushing for these kinds of initiatives.
Thank you, Bella, for that contribution. I would like to go back to Greer with some questions more specific to the program itself. Is there anything that you would change for future programs? We did hear from organizations and artists about the need for longer timeframes, for instance, that would enable people to gain the clear the alignment of expectations and roles and so forth, and to help them plan better for their collaborations and so forth. But is there anything else? I mean, more support for the collaboration itself. But I know you're probably thinking this is all like, wishful thinking, given the context, the new context. But anyway, in a perfect world, what would you want to see in a program, in future programs?
In a perfect world, I think this is an opportunity that we can do some other things. One of the real issues for me doing this my entire adult life is the lack of commitment to the arts in general by this country. I always bring up the fact that every country around the globe has a minister of art and culture as a cabinet position. This country does not. And that speaks to where it falls, on the totem pole. Then if you drill down further, when we talk about pivoting and looking at the state of New York, we have to also be around people that understand that this New York State is huge, and there is a state that exists outside of the George Washington Bridge. And what goes on in the Hudson Valley, Catskill, Leatherstocking, wherever. That's what America looks like. That's what the country looks like. New York State is its own animal. And those of us that are in New York State doing this work need to be at the table in the conversation to help build strategy so it can be successful with another kind of understanding about the communities that we serve and the expectations that for the granting process, for example, it's the same expectation that you get in the city for up here. No, it can't be the same. I live in a place where there's no transportation. If I do something and people can get there at 5 o'clock, how are they going to get home? Because the bus stop's running at 5:30. So there's a whole lot of things that come into it, and we are not at the table. So those are all of what Bella is saying is true. But if they don't have folks like me in the room, it's going to be the same story. I can go on, but I won't.
That's a great point, and hopefully the policy experts and policy makers in the room will provide us with some insights and ideas for what works best when we try to get groups of workers to get a seat at the table. So with that, I think I'll go to Odo now. Thank you so much, Odo, for joining us. And in your position at the New York State Department of Labor, you handle a lot of data and analysis about the workforce and the economic development of communities across the state. Can you give us your perspective about artists as workers and their importance in our economy?
Absolutely. So Maria, thank you for having me here. I hope you can hear me, but thank you for having me here. And this is weird because me and Maria go back pretty far, all the way back to Boston. And so it's just odd seeing you. It's just amazing. I know how amazing you are in the research you do. And so talking about you, typically when I'm talking about labor market information, most of the information is new to the people who are hearing it. But for folks who are in this industry, studying this information, like yourself, you know that the arts community or art production is a large part of the New York State's budget overall. And like Greer mentioned earlier, there's more to New York State than what goes on in New York City. And so the value add is over $151 billion as far as the art production in New York State, and that's from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So that doesn't even just come from New York State, that's looking at us as a country as a whole. So we're second only to California in that way. And the arts community makes up about 4.8% of the total employment in New York State. And that probably doesn't capture people who have to take on other work to be able to survive, like was mentioned earlier during our conversation. But one of the things I thought was interesting is I did not know, like Greer mentioned earlier, that every country has a minister of arts and culture other than the US. So that was eye-opening to me. I definitely can go into the data about all the different pieces of the economy and how arts ties to it. And I have to be, I serve in the capacity where we execute the policy that is signed by the governor, right? But one of the things I hear in this conversation is about how art can be a part of the infrastructure of New York, or considered part of the infrastructure of New York. It is, but actually be a part of the policy of looking at it as part of infrastructure. And I think that's a good way of looking at this conversation, me looking at it from the outside. And I'm also a School of the Arts alum from Rochester, New York. So go figure.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting idea, although making the arts part of the infrastructure, right, of our economy. And it's something that we should definitely explore further and somehow include it as part of our economic development policies and support, including the budget, right, the state budget. So I have another question for you, Odo, and it has to do with the fact that we highlighted in our report that artists are almost or very rarely recognized as workers, and artistic activity is not recognized as work. And so for that reason, they are in a situation which is similar to other groups of workers that have been historically excluded from labor and employment protections, including domestic workers and so-called gig workers. And so we found that the majority of the artists traditionally engage in work as independent contractors, short-term freelancers, or even volunteers. And so I know that and actually the assembly member spoke about that earlier today. He actually led the passage of the freelance isn't free law, which became a state law last year. And as we said earlier in our presentation, most of the artists who participated in the Artist Employment Program went back to engage in work as independent contractors, but as such, they're not covered by most of our labor and employment laws. So the freelance isn't free law is like a breakthrough, right? And so can you tell us more about this new law and what would help its implementation and enforcement?
Yeah, so everything you said, the Assembly member Harry Bronson was a sponsor for Freelancers and Free, the Freelancers and Free Act 2024. And that was sort of piggybacked off of the version that was in New York City. I think it came out in 2017. And so it's designed in a way to allow for freelancers to outline the contractual obligations, be paid on time, protect them from exploitation. And one of the resources that was created by the New York State Department of Labor was the model contract. Someone mentioned on here earlier having to get a lawyer to help her secure some of her work or to be able to deal with some of the issues she was dealing with. This contract, this model contract is a contract that sits on our website at the New York State Department of Labor, and it allows someone to be able to have a framework for being able to go through the details with whoever you're going to do business with. And it's mandatory for freelancers, especially when it's valued over $800 or more, and for projects within 120 days of each other. And so I think it's important because it allows for no miscommunication between two parties on what's expected as far as the work is concerned, the details. It's really good. I was talking to, in preparation for this, I was talking to the person who actually put it together, and she did a great job putting this contract together. I wanted to give it to one of my nieces who's in music, because I'm like, this is a really good, well put together model contract, and I'll put it in the chat for folks to get to. But the Department of Labor put together the model contract, but the Attorney General is the group that you go through if there is an issue. Part of the stipulation with the model contract is individuals are supposed to keep a copy of it for a certain period of time. And that's important because if you get to a point where there's some litigation or there's some issues, you can go back to that contract, and the Attorney General can go back to that contract and hold the party accountable. And did that answer your question? I want to make sure.
Yes, that's very helpful. That's a very comprehensive overview of it. So in your view, although so the infrastructure is there, right? For this law, but the issue is its implementation, right? How do you get people to know about it and actually, sort of engage in co-enforcement of this law, right? Because if people don't know, if artists don't know that there is this law, right, which could be the case for a lot of artists, then they don't know the rights, right?
Yeah.
So anyone on the panel, I mean, Odo, of course, but anyone on the panel, do you have ideas about how we can sort of disseminate this and other protections? Yes, Odo.
So I'm sure some of my team will hate me for this, but we are more than likely to talk to stakeholders and get out there. Like, I'm volunteering people, but we're more than likely, we are fine. We will, if individual CBOs, organizations want us to come and talk about it, if there's some material you want us to get out there to folks on this subject, we'll do it. We'll do it. I know my commissioner supports us on this because she was a leader of a union in the art industry. So we will do it if it's something that is needed. And I think it starts with individuals talking to people, word of mouth. And then as far as communities are concerned, again, sharing that information and making it part of the culture so that when people talk to each other, they're saying, if you did that quote unquote gig, or you worked with this group, did you get a contract? So that it becomes part of the culture. It becomes something that everyone's thinking about or doing, and that people don't feel pressured not to do it, because it's against the law to pressure someone not to do the contract.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I think this is a good segue to the topic in which Angel is an expert. Angel, we also go back many years, right?
We do, Maria.
And we come from similar worlds because we both come from working for unions, and we know a lot about labor relations. We were both at Cornell, ILR, in different ways, but we were there. And so I would like to ask you, because in your position, in your current position, you have to deal again a lot with unions, and you see how they're able to get a seat at the table, right? What does it for them? What is how do they do this? Because they're a very powerful force in both workforce and economic development. They're partners, right, for the state. So I wonder if there are lessons from the union world that artists can draw, right?
Yep, sure. So, Maria, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to serve on this panel today. I very much appreciate any opportunity that I get to strengthen and grow the labor movement in the state of New York. New York is a labor state. New York City is a labor town, they say. So any opportunity that I get to do that, I really appreciate. So thank you for the opportunity. And, I think I'm going to draw a little bit from my experience at the United Federation of Teachers. Before I came to the governor's office, I served in both legislative affairs and political action there, where I got to really be the person to push our state government in certain directions. And so I think, when it comes to unionization and specific things that unions do, it provides them an opportunity to advocate at the state capitol as one unified voice, right? You are pooling together your resources to be able to come to the state capitol or bring your elected officials into your home as a union to engage with them directly. You can put together lobby days. You can have staff that's directly inside the state capitol day in and day out. And that's their responsibility to be building relationships and constantly advocating for the needs of the unionized workforce. And a good example of something else that is possible is I'm putting together a roundtable in Rochester tomorrow for the governor to go. And so she can listen to rank and file union members directly and hear their needs. And I'm using our relationship with the New York State AFL-CIO, which is also a part of the bigger force in labor and unionized and organized labor in New York State, right? It is a representation of 2.5 million workers, retirees, and their families. And they often put their force behind any particular issue that any given organized labor organization is seeking to advocate for. And so you have the New York State AFL-CIO that you become, as an affiliate, you become a part of, and that's a very powerful force. And then, you also have the opportunity to, again, pool your resources so you can build and launch campaigns on specific issues. And that's when you can draw in your not-for-profits and your advocacy organizations. The Fight for 15 or the increasing of minimum wage wasn't done just by organized labor. They brought in other groups to support those endeavors. And then last but not least, that's a lot of it is on the legislative side, is the political side as well. Unions have the ability to endorse candidates. They vet candidates. They choose to support candidates that are going to push for their agenda, and that is something that they leverage in the policy-making process after elections are said and done. But just, those are some of the ways that unions gain a seat at the table and unions become the powerful force and voice that they are in New York State.
Now that's very helpful and interesting too, because from the research we did, we found that researchers in other countries, in European countries, actually recommended artists to form labor organizations, to unionize. They said that should be a policy, like a program, an initiative that they should take seriously and undertake. So what do you think, Greer? You're hearing these ideas about programs, policies that could be implemented, initiatives that would empower artists as workers, but there is also curiosity about programs for organizations, right? And I actually have questions in the queue for related to that. So would you like to react a little bit to these ideas?
Yeah, anybody that, well, Bella and I have been through this program together. So some of the things that happened to some of my colleagues in the field were strange for me, because that's not the way you act when you're professional and you want your reputation to stay intact. So that being said, um, the size of organizations and what has not happened for organizations has a lot to do with how people move through the world. So this is such a nuanced thing, because I know one of my former artists in residence through the program is on this call, maybe more than one. But I know Christopher Dean Sullivan is on, and he is part of the Musicians Union here in the Hudson Valley, and they have a way of organizing. So when we're talking about initiatives, we've got initiatives on several levels in terms of artists and what they've been able to do and not do, and then organizationally for what has not happened. I, for one, did not know about this contract, but I don't mistreat people, so it was never an issue. But that doesn't mean that I won't have it going forward, just in case. So this is huge. And the first thing that I would like to see happen is all of this data. We have been studied. All of the data is there. Um, the room be constructed that people can be in from all of the nuanced places, and this kind of conversation can happen. Not just the problem has been the marquee names are always there. I for one have a real problem with New York State Council on the Arts, and I'd love to talk to Kathy Hochul about it. Lincoln Center and all of those folks that are heavily endowed should not be picking off money from the rest of the state and folks that are delivering to people that don't have opportunities. Those kinds of conversations, I'm going to be real personal about it, should happen. And those things have not happened. I don't know if I'm still on the topic, but those are the kinds of things that we just can't talk about it, particularly in a place like New York, because when you talk about diversity, we are diverse, and we've got environmentally we're diverse. That George Washington Bridge thing in the rest of the state is real, and we need to be in a place where we can. I'd love to have be in a room with Governor Hochul. She's in Rochester. She needs to come to the Hudson Valley and have the same conversation. I'd like to see her do that in a few of the areas, so those conversations can be had.
Can I jump in, Maria? I feel like
Sure.
I really want to +1 on that. It was really intentional for us at CRNY. We gave half of our funds, and half of our collaborations were outside of New York City, very intentionally, because we knew that so much of the funding often just goes to the city, and it's a big, diverse state, as Otto said, and it's important that that money gets spread around. So that was a big priority for us. The other thing I will say, extending from what Greer's saying, like, it's so much about finding and supporting the small organizations, the community-based organizations that are really doing the work on the ground in the communities. And it's about centering the voice of individual artists, because that is what we saw from the beginning of this, is that PPP was great, right? Like, all these big institutions got money to keep their staff, keep their staff going, but that staff did not include the artists who were on contract. And so you have this $151 billion industry in the state of New York, and the engine of that industry is all of these artists who are out of work. who are not protected by these employment measures. And so it's so much about having the workforce, understanding artists as a workforce and supporting that workforce. And what can you do to support that workforce? So I have two things that I really want to point out about that, that we spent a lot of time talking and thinking about and working on. One is this, in our policy playbook, which Sol, thank you for dropping the link to that in the chat here. You'll see that one of the things we're pushing for is worker protections. And one of the biggest worker protections that we think is important is around healthcare benefits and making sure that there's a portable benefit strategy that artists have access to, and gig workers broadly have access to, right? So they can actually get the healthcare that they need. That's a big one in terms of worker protections. And then another is my colleague, Chris Millet, led an effort around an artist and culture worker bill of rights, which Sol also dropped that in the chat. And that is really about things like contracts. It's about standardizing and making explicit wage rates. Like it's having those kinds of things a lot more explicit and having folks be able to rally around it as an extension, as a pushing, as a next step on Freelance Isn't Free, really pushing for enforcement, really pushing for actually, getting folks to adopt these ideas and adopt these policies. So I think those two things are very, very important in that vein. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance, again, of centering individual artists and having individual artists at the table when you're having these conversations, right? And I so applaud Maria in this conversation, in all of the research work you did. Artists were first and foremost in terms of like being part of the research design and the conversations and the presentation. And I feel like it's got to be the same as we work on policy initiatives. Artists have to be at the table to help drive all of this, because ultimately it's about making sure their lives and livelihoods are secure.
But can I add also that foundationally to all of this, if we as a human body continue to look at arts as just like an add-on, the people that are spending the money and writing the check, even though they may write big checks, it has nothing to do with them understanding what arts bring to humanity, what it brings to education. We know that. The data is there that proves that. We know how reading scores change with math. We know how various other things change with music. We know that, but it is not, but it is still seen as an add-on. It is not seen as integral. It should be like food.
Can I make one more plug? So 100%. And so a big thing that we've been excited by is in California, for example, they have a creative economy plan. There is a very clear understanding that the creative economy is a major driver for the broader economy. And so one of the things that we're also pushing for is a creative economy plan for New York State. Until we get, obviously in this environment, it's going to be difficult to get a Minister of Art and Culture. That's not, maybe on a federal level, going to be very challenging. But within the state, this is a good moment to push for a creative economy plan for New York State. And that's also something that we're really hoping to push on. And next week, actually, for anyone who's in the New York City area, we're doing on Wednesday an event at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that's all about this connection between the creative economy, the broader economy, and the creative workforce. So we would love for you all to come. I'll see if Sol can drop that link in the chat too. Thank you. Free.
Bella and Greer, I'm not an advocate. However, if I was an advocate, I would look at when you talk about the creative economy, sometimes individuals don't understand the role of art in the everyday life that we live in. And somehow drawing those narratives together is a way, sometimes it seems like a way of making people understand how the everyday things you come in contact with is a part of the artistic expression. And so if I were an advocate, I would think about how to bring those things together while talking about the creation of the creative economy.
Thank you for that contribution, Odo, and of course Bella and Greer. I do have a lot of questions for you from the queue. So there is one. It says, do any of the panelists see a future possibility of a New York State Commissioner of the Arts? It's an interesting idea. would any of you, especially Angel and Odo, who have more of an insider look into these things, into these processes for restructuring government, etc., is that something that can fly in New York State?
I would say, I mean, listen, ideas are always possible, right? I would never never say impossible. The possibility always stands, right? I think state government needs to hear from the advocacy side the need. It needs to hear from the legislatures why we should do this, right? Create that voice, create that narrative, tell the story, and amplify that message. And I think that really anything is possible.
I will piggyback off of what Mr. Vasquez said. If one of the things about the artistic expression is you have platforms to share information. And so finding ways to, if you have a collective voice and that's something that you're aiming for, and you have a clear goal, you have the platforms to make that to make it plain.
Great. Well, this brings us to the end of our panel, and I kind of like feel it would be great to continue this conversation, but I hope all of you find an opportunity to do that now that you're connected. And so I thank you again so much for your contributions. I wish we had even more time to continue this conversation. But we need to move to our next section.